This is Kodak, a brand so iconic that for most of the 20th century, if you had a camera in your hand, it was probably Kodak. For decades, Kodak didn't just dominate the photography industry, it defined it. But then, everything went wrong. How does a company that was once worth $26 billion go bankrupt? This is the story of how Kodak invented the future and then walked away from it. In the late 1990s, Kodak was sitting on top of the world. They controlled 85% of the camera market and 90% of the film market in the US. But there was something lurking in the background, something that would change everything. To understand Kodak's downfall, we need to go back to the 1970s. Kodak had built an empire on film photography. Every family's photo album, every Hollywood movie, every major newspaper, Kodak was in all of it. But in 1975, an engineer at Kodak named Steven Sasson invented something that would change the world. He called it the digital camera. Yes, Kodak invented the first digital camera in 1975. It was bulky, slow, and took photos that were, well, let's say less than Instagram-worthy. But Sasson knew this was the future. He took it to his bosses at Kodak and said, "Look, this is going to change photography forever." And they were like, meh. See, here's the thing. Kodak was so good at selling film that they didn't want to risk it all for some untested technology. They thought, why would we destroy our cash cow? People love film. They'll never switch. It's what we call the innovator's dilemma. When companies are so big and successful, they're afraid to innovate because it threatens their current business model. By the 1990s, digital cameras were getting smaller, faster, and better. But Kodak still wasn't fully on board. They dipped their toes into digital photography, but still held on to film because that's where they made most of their money. Meanwhile, competitors like Sony, Canon, and Nikon went all in on digital. Kodak could have been the leader of this revolution, but they were stuck in the past. And then, in the early 2000s, the digital wave hit hard. Here's where things get really interesting. Kodak actually saw the future. They even developed one of the first digital cameras for consumers, the Kodak DC-40. But instead of fully committing, they kept pouring resources into film. Why? Because film sales were still huge, and executives didn't want to risk those profits. In 1996, Kodak was worth $26 billion. That's billion with a B. But by 2012, they filed for bankruptcy. The company that invented digital photography was left in the dust by companies like Canon and Sony. What's even crazier is that Kodak had all the tools to dominate the digital market. They had patents for digital cameras, printers, and imaging technology. But instead of pivoting, they tried to protect their legacy. And that legacy ended up crumbling. By 2003, Kodak stopped making traditional film cameras altogether. And in 2012, they filed for bankruptcy.